west. That's what most senior politicians have been doing this week as the campaign enters its final stages ahead of Saturday's Senate election. Jason Clare, the Labor frontbencher, the Shadow Minister for Communications, has arrived there as well to throw his weight behind the Labor campaign there in these final days. Thanks for joining us. Can I start, before we get to the West Australian campaign, Dave, with just a couple of portfolio questions in relation to communications? Malcolm Turnbull, the Minister, today announced another $15 million will be spent to subsidise up to 9,000 people, mostly in rural and remote areas, to access the NBN because of what he says was the train wreck left by Labor for those using the interim satellite service. Did Labor leave these rural customers in the lurch?
Well, David, as a minister, you've got a choice. You can either whinge and complain about things, or you can step in and fix things and get things done. Malcolm Turnbull's been whinging about this for now 6 or 7 months. I'm glad that he's done this and he's finally taken these steps. I think what this shows is that it's easy to underestimate demand. When people get access to broadband, they want more, and they want more demand.
And is that what happened here? Because Labor's plan left capacity for only 48,000 users, and on this satellite service has been a whole lot more than that.
Oh, I think they underestimated demand. And the same will be true of the NBN right across the country. That's why you need to build it with fibre, not with copper. You've got to build a network that's going to meet the needs of Australia, not for 5 years, but for the next century. And that, I think, is the crucial mistake that this government is making.
So let me be clear about your policy then. Labor's policy is still to connect as many homes as possible to fibre.
You talk to most of the experts, David, and they'll tell you that fibre to the home is the end game. So the question is, do you build it in one stage or two? We form the view that you build it in one stage. Interesting to see yesterday that the head of NICTA, the nation's ICT research centre, said that that's the right solution, it's the obvious solution. And if you're building a network for a return on investment over the course of decades rather than a couple of years, that's what we should be doing. So our view is build it in one step. The government has effectively said build it in two. It looks like it's going to require a Labor government before we get this right and finish the job.
So if you are back in office in 2.5 years, you'll get back to laying fibre to the home beyond what the coalition has done?
Well, as I said, David, fibre is the end game. Ultimately, for Australia to compete with other countries in our region like Japan or South Korea that have got fibre to the home, if we're going to compete on a level playing field, then fibre is what we're going to need. We'll need to see how much this government has wrecked the NBN between now and the next election. But if we're going to compete with the rest of the world, then Australians are going to need the infrastructure that will set them up, not for 5 years, but for the next century.
But there'd have to be some sort of review you're signalling there to see where things are at, perhaps what the demand would be for that, and whether indeed it would mean slower access or slower connections for many Australians.
Well, what's clear is, as people get access to infrastructure, they want more and more services. Think about electricity. When every house in Australia got electricity, things like vacuum cleaners or air conditioning or TV didn't exist. But as soon as the infrastructure was there, then the innovation happened and people demanded more and more services. That's what will happen with the NBN. When we wire up the whole country, new technology will become available. People will want more and more services. And the risk we've got is that the short-term approach that Tony Abbott has adopted here means that we'll be caught short and won't be as competitive as we could be. Now, Tony Abbott said almost 12 months ago that the whole country would get access to the NBN by 2016. As soon as he got elected, he broke that promise. And this weekend is an opportunity for the people of Western Australia, a pretty rare opportunity to say, hang on a second, you promised us the NBN by 2016. That was a lie. You broke that promise. Now's an opportunity to send a message to Canberra that that's not good enough, and we're going to send a message by voting against the Liberal Party this weekend.
Let's turn to some of these other issues in the mix in the lead up to Saturday. In the GST in particular today, we know Labor is opposed to any increase or broadening of the GST, but what is Labor's answer to the problems Martin Parkinson identified? Falling productivity, falling terms of trade, an ageing population. This is putting more pressure on the budget bottom line. What is the answer if it's not the GST?
Well, our position's very clear. We don't think the GST is the answer. It's been our position for a very long time. What we saw over the course of the last 24 hours is the Liberal Party indicating that they think it is. Treasury secretaries don't make
the Treasury
speeches like
Secretary
that.
has, but Joe Hockey said it's not changed their position.
What do you think, David? Treasury secretaries don't make speeches like this unless they've got the permission of the Treasurer to do it. Joe Hockey has put this on the table to see how people react. I think it's pretty clear. And
all right, well,
my
back
view,
to the
Labor
question.
Party's view,
If it's not the GST, what's
sure.
the answer to these problems, these challenges that the head of Treasury, who was there for a long time when Labor was in government, what's the answer?
Well, it's not the job of the opposition to give the government the answers. They've got a Commission of Audit report that's sitting on Joe Hockey's desk, which he's refusing to release until after Saturday because he's afraid that if the people of Australia see it, and more particularly, if the people of Western Australia see this report, they won't vote for them on the weekend because it's full of cuts.
Are you seriously saying it's not the job of the opposition to have policies, to have answers on...
No, I'm not saying that, David, and I know you wouldn't be putting words in my mouth.
No, but you've just said it's not your job to give the government solutions. I'm just asking what you think might be the answer.
Well, it's the job of the opposition to build its policies in advance of the next election, but it's not the job of the opposition to give the government the answers. Joe Hockey's responsibility here is to put forward a budget that builds the nation for the future. All we've seen in the last 6 months is him double the deficit and see unemployment go up. It's a bad start from this government, and it'll get worse if they cut money to schools and cut money to hospitals, let alone the tax when you go to the doctor that's now being proposed by different members of the Liberal Party.
Can I finally ask you about the issue of Labor Party reform? We've seen, a number of people this week starting to build the case for Labor to have a rethink about its ties to the trade union movement. Where do you stand on this?
Well, the Labor Party was forged out of the union movement, and our job, like the job of unions, is to improve the lives of working people. But over the last 100 years, things have changed a lot. Most people aren't members of unions anymore, and I think the party needs to change to reflect that. My view is that people who vote Labor should be able to be members of the Labor Party, and the rules are structured in such a way that it doesn't allow that at the moment.
So you don't have to be a union member in your view. You can just be a Labor Party member.
Yeah, well, the person who turns up on election day and will turn up hopefully at polling booths in WA this weekend and grabs the Labor How to Vote and says that's the one I want, they should be able to become members of the Labor Party, whether they're union members or not. And that's my view. I think that's part of a bigger reform. Those people who vote Labor, who cheer us on, who want us to win and want us to govern the country, they should also have a chance to select Labor candidates. I'm talking about community pre-selections or primaries, the chance to decide who the Labor candidate is. I think it would make me a better Member of Parliament if I was selected not just by Labor Party members, but by Labor Party voters in the hundreds and thousands.
Some interesting ideas to put in the mix there, Jason. Clare, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
No worries. Thanks, Dave.